Hi, this is Jay Levins. I'm Senior Director of Marketing here at Actifio, and I'm here with our GM of Cloud Solutions, Ashok Ramu. Ashok,
Hey,
thanks
Jay.
for coming.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Today what we're talking about is SAP Hana and Actifio. So Ashok, why don't you start by telling us a little about how Actifio works?
Sure thing. As you can see in this picture here, Actifio started out with the concept of protecting application consistent data sets, right? And our philosophy is you capture the data once and then you use it any number of times. And this stands true across the application space we work with. So we work with your traditional database applications like SQL and Oracle. We work with any flavors of Windows and Linux. And we also work with your esoteric Unixes like AIX, HPUX machines. And then the questions you talked about, Jay, we work very closely with SAP and integrate with all types of SAP databases. So for instance, we work with SAP on Oracle, SAP on Sybase, SAP on HANA, and many other database environments. So the fundamental philosophy, as we talk about, is Actifio captures any and all of these applications in a native format, an application consistent native format. And we use an application native tool to capture it. So we use a VSS snapshot and capture SQL using that capability. We use RMAN to capture Oracle. And then we use some of our patented homegrown capabilities to capture application consistent SAP data from the variety of databases as well, which we'll go into detail.
Cool, great. So that sounds really interesting. And then what about recovery? How would we recover the data or bring it back if we wanted to access it or use it really?
Absolutely, right? So when you talk about data recovery, there are two aspects to recovering any of these data sets. There is data and there's metadata, right? So what Actifio does is, because we go application down, we're very aware of the application metadata as well as the data. So when we present the data back, and as listed here, we can present the data back in any one of these environments, right? We can go right from AWS, Google, Azure, IBM, VMware Cloud, and also back to your data center. So you could capture from one location and recover in another location. And the way the recovery works is, because we're application aware, we not only bring up the database, we tie the database to the database binaries and bring up your entire application stack on the recovery side.
And then, so how about next level down? How about with SAP HANA specifically? How does that work? So that's, I think, an in-memory database, right? Might be a little different.
Exactly, right? So SAP comes in various configurations, right? People can run SAP on Oracle, SAP on Sybase, and SAP on HANA. And HANA, like you said, is an in-memory database. So typically, when you look at SAP environments, they are running on Linux machines, right? And typical Linux machines from a data protection standpoint will require LVM, which is the logical volume manager, to basically run the database. And they typically will have two partitions, for one partition for data and one partition for logs. So what Actifio has done is, basically we capture data from a consistent format from SAP. So we leverage LVM snapshots fundamentally to capture the data in a consistent format. And once we get the snapshot, we have our own tracking mechanism to tell us what blocks change in those snapshots. And with the combination of these two, we're able to efficiently capture data and present it in the same format we do for other applications. In fact, we are the only technology in the industry to do this today. And irrespective of your data volume size, irrespective of the type of data set that you have underneath SAP, the capture and the use mechanism works the same way.
Gotcha. What about, I know that SAP has some tools, BR tools, I think is one of them that sometimes people use to protect SAP environments or HANA environments. Does Actifio use BR tools?
Actifio uses, the BR tools was considered the old style of backing up SAP. This is the traditional backup mode where you dump the database as a full for the first time, incremental forever, and then recover it using the old-fashioned mechanism. There are some goods about it. It's known to work, and it's worked for many years. But the bads about it is, as the data volume grows, when a lot of SAP deployments are in multi-terabytes, the recovery times are just unfathomably, they're really large. So if you want a very low RTO and a very low RPO, which is a recovery time objective and recovery point objective, the BR tools are not able to deliver that capability, which is why we've resorted to the capability of, if it's an Oracle database, Oracle has native change block tracking, which we use. If it's not an Oracle database and a database like Sybase or HANA, then we have our own capability to do the change block tracking, which will give you the same optimal recovery times.
Now, is any of this different if we're using a physical environment for SAP HANA as opposed to maybe a virtual environment?
Absolutely not. So Actifio works one way irrespective of where your application lives, right? As long as SAP runs on Linux, that Linux could be a physical Red Hat server, physical Debian server, physical SUSE server. It could be running in Google. It could be running on Azure. It works the same way.
Gotcha.
Actifio is kind of neutralizes the infrastructure. We're infrastructure agnostic. So we basically go application down, and SAP is SAP no matter where you run it. So that's what makes the method very easy to use. And so customers, looking at cloud or trying to migrate data to the cloud are able to leverage this technology to protect it the same way on the source and recover it on the target and use it the same way. So that technology works that way.
Gotcha. Now, when I do recovery and I'm bringing it back, how do I bring that SAP environment back into production? Are there any challenges that I might face trying to restore SAP HANA and then bring it back into production?
So when you look at recovering SAP, there are three aspects you need to consider, right? First is you have to basically, SAP is a set of binaries. You need to bring up the binaries.
Yep.
You need to bring up the operating system that's housing the binaries. And you might have custom patches in the operating system that you want to always keep up to date. And finally, you want to bring up the database and the database binaries.
Sure.
Right? So if you take these three pieces have to be captured distinctly, and the person or the application that's capturing it should be aware of the fact that these three pieces have to be stitched together for the system to come back up. So what Actifio does is Actifio does an efficient capture of the operating system. We capture system state. So we can capture the boot OS and all of the other elements that make up the Linux machine. We stand that machine up in any of these environments. Once that machine is stood up, then we're able to present to it logically the SAP and the database binaries. So now this machine looks like the shell that was running SAP on your source.
Gotcha.
Finally, what we do is to the shell, we present the SAP data and the associated logs. Now your environment is up and running.
Gotcha. When I hear things like boot volumes and stuff like that, it makes me think of bare metal. Can you do bare metal recoveries with this kind of approach?
So yes, so we can capture the bare metal component. So we can capture the boot volume, the OS partitions, and all of the other data partitions inside the machine. And when we bring it up in the cloud environment in an AWS or Google, we're able to convert those bare metal or those boot volumes to the format appropriate to the hypervisor. So that machine is stood up, and then the data is presented to the environment.
Gotcha. And then what about transaction logs? What about the ability to use those and protect them and perhaps use them to roll backward or forward as needed?
So, like I said, we have two components we capture, the data and logs, right? And the transaction logs is what we use to capture at a much finer grain interval. So if you want, let's say, a recovery point objective, which means your data cannot be stale for more than 15 minutes, what we typically do is we capture the data itself once every 6 hours, let's say. And the transaction logs are captured every 15 minutes. So what you get is, because Actifio is aware of the database data and the logs, we are able to marry the two on the recovery side and get you up to a 15-minute recovery. So that's how we achieve really low RPO with SAP.
Gotcha. Now, what happens if I have my SAP database, I experience some corruption, and I want to bring back maybe certain tables or fields, not the entire database? Can I do that too?
Absolutely, right? So as part of recovering the database, and as part of the recovery operation, which is the use component of the Actifio story, we have built in what's called a data transformation piece. So tied into the data transformation piece is the ability for the end user to dictate what the data looks like downstream. So you can capture a production database, and it's a very common occurrence. So you mentioned corruption, but the most common occurrence is sensitive data.
Sure.
What if there's social security numbers, credit card information? How do I present that to my downstream environments? We have a workflow built into Actifio where you can take production data and you can basically take away the sensitive pieces, mask it, and then present the masked copy to the downstream so that the data has been sanitized when developers see that data. The same concept can be applied if you want to do subsetting. So if you want to take, let's say an Oracle has 100 table spaces and you just want to present 2 table spaces to the downstream environments, you can absolutely bring up the Oracle database, subset it, and present it to the downstream environment. So the transformation engine is powerful. We give you extensive scripting capabilities that you can provide because you know your data, right? Actifio will make sure the scripts are called at the appropriate time and will orchestrate the whole thing on a schedule.
Now you mentioned calling the right scripts and doing the right quiescing. So if I'm an administrator in an SAP HANA environment and I'm used to using the GUI inside of HANA and I want to make sure that my backups are being completed, are those backups that Actifio completes, are those reported or somehow available, or is HANA aware of it inside the GUI?
Yes, the HANA is aware of the HANA snapshots that we take. So specific to SAP HANA, the SAP HANA UI will show an HANA snapshot that Actifio has triggered. So you can track it in the UI to say the backups happened at a given point in time. So that's tracked there.
Gotcha. And then what about, as I'm doing these various backups, I'm thinking about the importance of HANA performance, because it's a very critical application. So as I'm running these backups, possibly as frequently as every 15 minutes, what does the overhead look like that for my SAP HANA server, for my compute, for my network, all that stuff for my environment? Is it going to be a big impact on my production?
I think that's a great question. What we have architected, we've architected a solution wherein we basically, for any type of application, including SAP HANA, the impact to production is always minimal with Actifio. And we ensure this with two things, right? We are an incremental forever product, which means you only do the entire data set once for the life cycle of the application. And then we are much more efficient in capturing changes. So we have filter drivers dropped in for SQL as well as Linux environments, which track what blocks in the volume changed. So we take a snapshot and we only move the changed blocks, right? And logs, because we move logs so often and we're able to marry the logs with the database, you can schedule your database backups as far apart as you want and still have a 15-minute log in a row. So overall, depending on the transactional volume of your database and how many changes occur, you can schedule a database backup maybe just once a day and play out the logs every 15 minutes. So we let you manage your data as often as you want because you best know the application, and Actifio can tune and cater to that very easily.
Great. Now I imagine the data backups might be larger perhaps than the logs. That may not be fair. But when you're running one of those copy operations, it's going over the network to the Actifio appliance, as illustrated here. What happens if the network goes down? What's going to happen to our backup job?
So there is enough resiliency built between the database layer as well as the Actifio engine that there's enough retries and protocol handshake happens. In the event there is a catastrophic network failure, the job will be retried after a given point in time. But because we are tracking changes the whole time, every time you do this, you're only moving what changed, right? So there is no additional data movement, so the overhead is minimal. So if you compare the Actifio solution to other solutions, where network retry is pretty common these days, right? Most products do that. Actifio is optimized to tell you, for this application, this is the smallest amount of data you can ever move to get to a consistent state.
Gotcha. So let me switch gears a little bit. A few weeks ago, we had a client in here who was a big SAP shop. And I was asking him about what he was using SAP for and the amount of copies. And he started reeling off, well, I have one for dev, I have one for training, I have one for user acceptance testing, I have one for other testing. And all of a sudden, that one database had like 10 copies.
Sure.
And so thinking about this in the context of that, how does Actifio help that? And let me add one more element, make it more complex for you. When you're getting the database to the different users, you might want the database to look different because they may not want to have access to social security numbers or other personally identifiable information that can be very private.
Sure.
So how can this solution, or how can Actifio help with that?
Great question. So we touched on the data masking capabilities and the workflow we tie into. So that's one mechanism wherein Actifio can take the production data set and by obfuscating or taking your data masking scripts that you give us to basically mask and erase and remove all of the sensitive information, present that copy to the downstream environment. Now, what we can do is we can present that same data to multiple downstream environments. So what you can do is basically capture the Actifio SAP database from here, and then turn around and present that to multiple cloud platforms, right? Actifio can then present that data to your compute in AWS, to your compute in Google, to your compute in Azure, and compute in IBM. They're all 4 different independent read-writable copies, and each end user sitting on Amazon, Google, Azure, or IBM can snapshot it or can manage the life cycle of each copy on their own. So this lets you control this, and you can also orchestrate and say how often you want to keep these copies refreshed.
Gotcha.
Right?
Now, if I'm the developer or the training guru, what is the process for me to get a new one of these? Do I have to sort of call and do the process, or I have to wait for many weeks as the admins have to go through their traditional processes to do this masking or whatever is needed? What does that look like
Absolutely
for me?
not, right? So we've built it so that this entire process can be end user driven. So the operational control can be held by the ops team that says, okay, Jay has access to the data on AWS, Geo has access to the data on IBM, etc. And based on the access rules set, the end user can go in and provision their own copy of the database. Actifio you incur no additional storage when the copy is provisioned. The only time you incur storage charges is when basically you start writing to that database and start making changes. And the one last piece I wanted to bring up is essentially, a question that's come up to me from a lot of customers is, what is the impact in terms of, how do you get an application consistent snapshot, right? Because that requires not only knowledge of the storage, which is at the LVM level, it also requires to tie into the database layer and the SAP layer. Right. So Actifio now has tie-ins with all of these layers. So when we take a backup, we're able to orchestrate across the different layers and basically put the database in a consistent state, take a snapshot, and then get the database going again. All of this happens in seconds so that your production is not impacted at all. So that's the mechanism how we've built it to capture HANA efficiently and also recover it in any environment.
Great. Well, Ashok, thank you.
Absolutely.
Everyone, thanks for attending this brief video, learning about how Actifio supports and protects SAP HANA. If you're looking for more information, please visit our website at actifio.com or follow us on Twitter at Actifio. Thanks again.
Thank you.